Good morning, everybody. Paul Croker here from 18IT. We're just going to let the rest of the participants join the session, and then we'll kick things off officially. Hopefully, it shouldn't be a minute or two, and we can get cracking. And you can find out more about Trillian and 18IT. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. It looks like we're all in the room now. The numbers of participants has stopped going up, so we'll make a start. My name is Paul Croker. I'm the owner and founder of a company called 18IT. We are outsourced IT managers looking at strategic approach to IT for businesses and some of the challenges and compliance that they're up against to make them as secure as possible. Joining us on the session today is the very talented and skillful John Innes from Trillian. We'll let him introduce himself in a minute. He can do a far better job than I can. But what I will say before we hand over to John is please do use the Q&A session button at the bottom of this. We really want you to get as much information as you can from this session today and really sort of add as much value as possible to the proposition so you can go away with as much detailed information as you need. Okay, I'm going to hand over to you, John.
Okay, thank you very much, Paul, and good morning, everybody. So today's session is going to be a bit different to what we usually do because I understand there's quite a mix of people on the call. So what we thought it would be interesting to do is talk a little bit more about, I mean, people probably on this call have heard about data breaches and the consequences, but what I want to do is like reveal a little bit more about what actually goes on under the hood, what that really means rather than just, you know, let's talk about data breaches again, because I think that could be a little bit dry. So I'd like to expose a little bit what goes on under the hood. But just to give you a flavour for why I particularly find data breaches an interesting problem is that we've been studying the data breach kind of environment and the market for the last sort of 5-6 years. And we've seen a huge explosion in the amount of information that's being stolen and leaked. So just to give you a flavour for that, back in when we started working on this problem back in 2017, we used to see a big data breach once every 6 or 8 weeks or something like that, and it would hit the news and it would be very sensational, and Bloomberg or the BBC would pick it up. And some classic examples of that were when Adobe got breached. They lost 152 million records, which was a big deal at the time. It was sensational enough to make the headlines. And then LinkedIn got breached, and again, you know, pretty much a household name. They lost 145 million records. At some point, eBay lost a load of data as well. And so we saw about 500 million usernames and passwords or records being leaked just from 3 attacks. And when you consider there's only about 7 billion people on the planet, 500 million in just 3 attacks was quite an interesting statistical number. But since then, we've seen just an explosion in data breaches. Like if there's a data breach today and it lost 150 million records, it probably wouldn't even make the back pages, honestly, because it's happening on like a daily basis and it's just not cool enough to talk about anymore. But what's fascinating to us as a company is the amount of honestly secret information that's being leaked during those data breaches and what the potential impact it could have for customers. And so we're just going to talk a little bit about that today. Just to give you a little bit of background about myself, if I can make myself, there you go. So I've worked in information security since the early 2000s. I worked in central government for a number of years. And during that time, one of my roles was to build a system that did log analysis. And some people on this call may be familiar with log analysis and some may not. But the idea of that is that you, when your computers are doing stuff, they write little logs out on their systems about what they're doing. So maybe it's I opened a file or Paul logged in or John logged in, but it doesn't just happen on computers, it happens everywhere. So if you've got a badge system to get into your building, it might say John badged into the building. So log analysis was a really useful tool. And this is, again, it's going back like 20 years now. But the idea was that we would actually build a system that would piece together those little fragments of logs so that we could try and understand a little bit more about what was going on the network. And then you could start revealing some really interesting patterns, like, John logged into his PC, but he didn't badge into the building. How is that even possible? So log analysis gave me a real passion for data. Actually, it was like, actually we all just assume data's data. It's a big blob of stuff there's far too much of it. But when you start kind of forensically and analyzing it, it starts popping out all these really interesting secrets. So after I'd done that for a couple of years, I left and actually joined a company in the US that specialized in this log analysis realm, and it had a really high-tech product. It was very cool, and I worked there for a number of years working in that space, and worked with a lot of banks and things like that. And then I decided that actually there was too much emphasis on the product and not enough emphasis on making the product work. So actually, I then founded a company called Edge 7, where that's exactly what we did. We were like, we're not really worried about the product, we're worried about how it's being deployed and used. And we really focused on what we call use cases. So what do you want to know from this data rather than just collecting it all? That was then acquired, and since that got acquired, I've worked for a number of sort of MSPs and service providers, including NCC Group. But I really like focusing on one problem. That's kind of my thing, really. So in 2017, I founded a company called Threat Status, and that's when we started peeling back the covers of data breaches, really, and sort of peering inside them and kind of go, what's going on, what's actually being leaked, and what's the impact, really. So we've been doing that now for 5-6 years. And it's been a real journey of in all sorts of ways, both technically in trying to create solutions to these problems, but also in seeing how that the market is evolving and how the threat actors are developing their capabilities in this space. And then about 3 months ago, we were acquired by a company called Crossword Cybersecurity. So we're part of a bigger family now. But actually, our core premise is to enable our technology partners like Brigantia and 18IT to be able to help protect their customers using our technology, really. So that's just me as a quick background. Paul, do you want to kind of go?
Thank you, John. That's great. Yes, so my name is Paul Croker. As I alluded to earlier, I founded a company called 18IT back in 2018. Our focus is on IT strategy. So we look ahead proactively at what your business is trying to do and how our clients are enabling their work staff to make sure that they can deliver their business plan. So one of those areas and silos that we help them with is around cyber threats and awareness, and really try to make themselves a harder nut to crack. So we look at processes, policies, as well as solutions and hardware, the traditional sort of approaches to stuff. So I talk about doing IT differently with a cup of tea and some rock and roll, and that's one of the ways which we use that as a segue to make a connection and start a conversation with the business to really find out how they work and who they are. We will allude to making great IT for that business as well. So we do that from having those discussions and understanding what's good for them. They've got unique individual requirements. They might have contractors, full-time members of staff. These all present very, very different threats and challenges to a business. And it's not stopping the business from working. It's thinking slightly differently about how can we enable all these different ways of working, but make it so it's secure and easy for the staff to use. We do that by pulling on my 20 years worth of experience in IT sector. So I've worked from IT consultancies back in the day. We were using very old traditional systems like SBS, Small Business Server 2000, 2003, way back when you put all your eggs in one basket. Apparently that was a good idea. But we're talking about having resilience and failover now, so that's a much better place to be going in. And my last corporate role was working for a large pan-European space company where I was heading up the IT for the UK. We had 2 sites, one in Bristol, one in Oxford. And I was also the country CISO, which is a security role, looking at how the entity here in the UK was managing our cyber footprint and making sure we were compliant with the bigger companies' policies, but also from the projects and individual bits and pieces we were doing in country here in the UK. It's enabled me to communicate with technical people and non-technical people. So some people say, Paul, you just don't stop talking. So that's where I tend to start wrapping things up. But it's the ability to listen to a company, let them articulate what they're trying to do and how they want to do that in business terms or plain simple terms, but then also taking that and talking technical to technical people, saying these are the areas that this business is really keen to address and how they're trying to sort that out. And recently, in the last sort of 6 to 7 months, I've started doing some keynote speaking sessions around cyber topics, but also around human influences in cyber and how that can be addressed. So I'll hand you back to John. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. And I think the point that you just made about talking non-technical to non-technical people is a really important one, and something that our industry is terrible at generally is that we assume that everybody understands what we're talking about as soon as we start talking about gobbledygook. And I've certainly been guilty of it myself in the past. And again, so what we're going to try and do today is, I've got no idea of people's kind of technical levels on the call, so we're going to assume none, and keep it quite high level, hopefully. But if you've got any questions as I go, or something doesn't make sense, or you want to get into it a bit further, then please just ping something in the Q&A. So data breaches, as I mentioned at the beginning, we're seeing so many of them now that they aren't even interesting. I mean, they're interesting to me, but they're not interesting to the news, right? They're happening on a daily basis, and it's like anything else. You become blind to them after a while because it's just another story. And one of the things that's interesting and was interesting to me right from the get-go was what happens after the data breach, right? So if you're using a service, whether that's a courier company or Dropbox or LinkedIn or some forum that you talk to your buddies about cricket scores on, for example, if they have a data breach, how do they see their responsibility as responding? And the answer is, quite often none, like complete deniability, like we haven't been breached, you're mistaken, or in fact they just won't tell anybody, so you will never get to hear about it. Or if they're if they're a bit more front facing about things, they might send out an email going, look, we're sorry, we take your security seriously, which is always a good one. We've reset your password, now go about your day. And this is probably as good as it gets, really. And I should make a point, actually, like any one of us could have a data breach. It's not like companies that have data breaches are bad companies. Far from it. Some of the biggest companies in the world have had data breaches. And that's because either they're very complex, or there was some tiny little door left open, or a user just made a mistake one time, or the attacker was just absolutely determined to get in. So data breaches are they're not going away. Like this is here for the long term, really. So there's no point in beating up on companies that have had data breaches. But the issue that I've got with it is the non-communication of the impact. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to peel back the layers a little bit. So what actually does a data breach look like under the hood? And this is a little bit technical, but hopefully it's not technical enough that people won't be able to follow. So this is actually this is the sort of thing that we might see if a company is breached. So the company will have all sorts of different systems and applications, and they'll be storing documents and things like that. But invariably, they will have somewhere where their users can log in, right? They'll have a little portal where you put your username and your password in, and that's your way into the application. So when the application gets hacked, and I'll just stay with LinkedIn because it has been hacked in the past, and it's famous. So if we just talk about LinkedIn for a minute. So they get hacked, their data gets stolen, and they go, we're really sorry, and we've reset your password or something like that. So you're kind of left thinking, poor old LinkedIn, but it doesn't really affect me. What's actually going on under the hood, though, is that this kind of data has been stolen. So there'll be a nice little table. You can imagine this like a spreadsheet if you want, and there'll be a nice little table, and it'll have a list of every single person that's ever signed up to that service. And it will normally have like a bunch of, frankly, quite personal information: the first name, last name, almost always your email address, because that's the thing that you use to get your password resets and sent to and things like that. You may have a user ID. So, in certain forums, you don't have to use your first name or your email address as your avatar. You might, fancy calling yourself Bobby123 on something. But sometimes very often we'll see passwords in this data as well. And it will literally be in the clear like this. So, LinkedIn had a breach, the data came down, it got circulated around. When we popped it open, it pretty much looked like this, right? We could see millions of people's email addresses and passwords. Their security question: what was your best holiday? Oh, I went to Vegas. What's your date of birth? Because we don't want anyone under the age of 16 on the platform. So this sort of spills out. And again, I'm only using LinkedIn as an example. This is happening on a daily basis to applications all over the internet. So information like this is spilling out, and it's a gold mine, like for criminals, right? Because they know your first name and your last name and your email address. So immediately I can send Bob an email going, "Hey Bob," which already feels pretty legit, because that's something that probably only a few companies would know is actually my first name. And I might, if I'm trying to fish him, I might be able to talk about, we met in Vegas one time or something like that. So this is as bad as it gets in some ways. We can see all this rich, clear information that's being leaked. So when a company goes, "Oh, we're sorry, we lost your data, but we've reset your password, carry on about your day," they don't talk about this stuff. They don't talk about the potential impact that it could have to you or your business. So this is one example. Another example, and this is, I've covered up some bits and pieces, but this is another real example. So we found another company get hacked, and this company specialized in PDF document conversion. So you might upload a Word document, for example, and you might want to convert it into PDF so you can send it off to somebody for signature or something like that. Or you get the idea. That's basically what they did. So they got hacked, and guess what? Like the information went out, and it was like, "Oh yeah, we lost a little hack, but don't worry about it. We've reset your password. Go about your day." So when we found the data, and again, just to make the point, we're not stealing any of this stuff, right? We're just observing what's been stolen, and then when it starts pinging around on the criminal forums and things like that, then we'll go and peek in and see what they found or what they've managed to steal. So we saw this other company, and they sort of said, "Yeah, we've had a little bit of an incident and we've lost a little bit of data, but actually in this case, don't worry about it, because your password was encrypted. So this is what an encrypted password might look like." And the idea, again, for the non-technical people, is that if you store the password like Spinner in a clear text table like this, that's really bad practice. It's not your fault, by the way. The people who built the application should not do that. They should put it through a little computer function that turns it into some Scrabble that is meaningless. And that's much better practice. But there are different ways of doing this, and some of them are far better than others. So in this first case, this application was poorly written, and they stored these passwords in the clear. That's not good. This second application that we found, they sort of said, "Yeah, we've been breached, but don't worry, your password is encrypted, so you don't need to worry about it. But we've reset it anyway, just to be on the safe side." And not too much information was lost, actually, so you don't need to worry. When we found this data, on first glance, we're like, "Yeah, okay, that looks sort of true." But then we found some other data that was alongside that data. So it was in a separate file, but we found this other file. And when we started looking at them, we're like, "Oh, this is interesting." So we've got this stuff along here. We've got his first name, last name, email address. We've got this scrambled password. We know the company name of the person that uploaded the PDF, and we've got this doc reference. So, and it's a meg. There's not too much I could do with that as a criminal. But when we found this second file, it looked like this, and it had like this reference in it, and then it had a file name, and it had a sent to column, and was it delivered, and some delivery dates and things like that. And for the eagle-eyed people on the call here, what you might notice is that these two references are the same. So as a criminal, what it would be very easy for me to do is join up these references and go, "Oh, right, Bob Smith is this guy. He's got a scrambled password. He works at Cricket Boss. And what's this ABC one to? Oh, he's sending end-of-year-accounts.pdf to Lisa at accountants.com and end-of-year-accounts.pdf to Dave at finance.com. So with a very small amount of effort, criminals are able to glue this stuff back together. This isn't nation state advanced attacks. This is very trivial stuff. So this sort of information is what's actually leaking all the time. And actually, if you were now Bob Smith and you get an email from this company going, we've reset your password, don't worry about it, you're probably not going to think twice about it. But if you were Bob Smith and you could actually see what was being leaked, well, hang on, you've just, like, these people are my trusted finance people. They know to expect end of year accounts.pdf from me. Like, a criminal could easily send them a file to that email address pretending to be me with that file name, and they're almost certainly going to open it. And not only that, but you know that I interact with this guy and this guy, so they could start sending me stuff. So when you start gluing the bits of data back together, the picture really evolves. It really opens up and it becomes a little bit more disconcerting. So I hope that all makes sense. And then just to top all this off, I mentioned that this password here that you can see has been scrambled. And in theory, that should be, I'm trying to look for the right word, but I'm going to say unscrambleable. I don't know if that's a word or not, but like in theory, there should be no way for attackers to like figure out what the original password is. But depending on how it was done, they can. There are techniques that they can use to unscramble that password. And again, in this case, and in quite often in the cases that we look at data, they have been able to unscramble these passwords. So again, you might get this message going, yeah, we're really sorry and we've lost your data, but your password was encrypted, so don't worry about it. Just because it was encrypted, it doesn't mean it can't be figured out, right? So again, this is why I get frustrated with the whole breach ecosystem, because nobody's being very transparent about the impact to people on here. However, they might go, you know, we've reset your password, so you don't need to worry about it. But if I'm a criminal and I've managed to obtain both of these bits of data, once again, the picture has just developed for me, because I can now see I've got Bob Smith, that's his work email address, and he uses Spinner. And Bob Smith was down here as well, and he also used Spinner because I was able to decrypt it, and I can see all these other files. So I now know that Bob likes using this password, right? Because it's leaked from more than one place. So there's a really good shot at me trying to get into Bob's account system or G Suite or something like that. So the more information, you know, the way that I put it, every time you read about a data breach, what's actually happening is there's more and more material falling into the hands of criminals so they can start doing this glue and putting it back together and creating pictures of people's behaviors and accounts online, which I know it probably sounds terrifying, and I'm not trying to do that in the slightest, but what I am trying to do is raise a bit of awareness here as to actually what's going on under the hood. So to give a couple of examples of how this has actually played out in the real world, there was an attack a couple of years ago by a hacking group called the Dark Overlord. And they managed to break into some really big companies in London and steal sensitive documents related to the 9/11 attacks. So they managed to get access to allegedly some insurance company infrastructure, and they managed to download these insurance documents. And they were sort of saying, look, you know, we know, they tried to create, not only did they get hold of the data, but they tried to create an entire conspiracy around it. Like, and they went to the media and they said, we've stolen all this data related to the 9/11 attacks. There was a lot of stuff that people don't know. And they just caused a big stir deliberately, because what they were trying to do is cause paranoia and embarrassment to the company they'd stolen the data from. And it sounded like a very sophisticated attack. You know, how did a group of attackers manage to break into a big insurance company and steal all their data? It actually transpired that it was pretty much one guy that did that attack. He's a UK guy based out of Northampton, I think he was. And, you know, you could read about this online. He lived in a little flat and he played PlayStation all day, and he kind of just did this for fun, basically. But how did a guy living in a flat playing PlayStation break into a big corporate network? Well, all he did was he went onto one of these forums, these criminal marketplaces, and for $10, he was able to buy a username and a password. And again, so this is like the ecosystem developing, right? So you've got this data spilling from everywhere, like applications, and these applications are going, we're really sorry, we've reset your password. People are starting to now decrypt the passwords, look for joins, look for commonality where people are using the same passwords more than once. Then they're starting to put them up for sale, going, oh, this person at this company seems to like this password, it might work. And then they put those passwords up for sale. So the people necessarily leaking the data, there's a whole different set of analysts like gluing it back together and then selling it on as meaningful data. And then somebody else who's really got no moral compass whatsoever is the guy that then goes and buys it and breaks into a company. So this is just one way that it's played out. And I know I'm talking about big company stuff here, but the message I'm trying to convey is, you know, if the big companies are vulnerable, so are the small companies too. And some people on the call may have heard about this attack, which was the Colonial Pipeline out in the US. So they, as the other statement says, the operator Colonial Pipeline said it had halted systems for 5,500 miles of pipeline after being hit by a ransomware attack. And this was a big deal, had effect on, well, you can imagine, like 5,500 miles of pipeline not working across the US is a big deal in anyone's book. And what happened was somebody managed to get inside of the network and for some time sit there, spread and drop malware all over it, so that at the opportune moment they could kind of pull a trigger and like encrypt the entire network. And so when you read about these ransomware attacks, they're not like, it's not like people are just bursting through the door and encrypting your networks. Usually they've been in there for some time and they've figured out a landscape, they figured out the landscape, what users are in there, what can they connect to, and they do all of that mapping in quiet time, so they don't want to get caught, but what they want to do is prepare for the day that they're going to kind of implement the ransomware. So this was a big deal. It obviously made the news. Once everything had been recovered, and in this case, I think they may have paid the ransom because it was the only way that they could get the operation back. They didn't have the luxury of a couple of weeks of no pipeline. So I think they paid the ransomware to get the operation back. And once they'd done that, they then called in a big company in the US to do like a post-mortem, like how did these guys get in? How did they destroy our network? You know, what do we need to learn from this? And not only because it's the right thing to do, I'm pretty sure the US government had something to say about that as well. So the company was brought in to do a post-mortem, and then the post-mortem was hackers breached the Colonial Pipeline using a compromised password. Investigators suspect hackers got a password from a dark web leak. So we've seen, and this goes back to the original kind of conversation that I opened with, we've seen forums that are really well-meaning hobbyist forums, and we saw one that was dedicated to helping engineers figure out problems, and it was probably started by an engineer who worked on a pipeline. So there's a thing called SCADA, which is basically all the switches and controls that sit on pipelines and power plants and generators, and you know, it's a well-known piece of technology that's used to control pipelines and things like that. So what somebody had done is that they had created a little forum because maybe they had a problem on figuring out how to fix this piece of electronics. So they're like, you know, loads of people must have this problem. So I'm going to create a little website and I'm going to create a community where we can all talk about our problems and share fixes and stuff like that. But he didn't know anything about running a website. So he just built this little forum. Suddenly all of these engineers pile into the forum because they think it's a great idea. I'm always trying to troubleshoot pipeline problems and stuff like that. And they're engineers, right? So they're logging into that forum using bob@colonialpipeline.com with a password of pencil and sharing with their friends about the problems that they're having. And then they're using that same username and password to log into the pipeline and fix problems, never thinking that those things could be linked. And then when this forum gets hacked and those usernames and passwords are stolen, they're just shared. Like criminals end up with them and they're shared. And at some point, somebody came across one for Bob at Colonial Pipeline, tried it on part of the Colonial Pipelines network, and was like, "Whoa, I'm in." So this is the problem with data leaks. Like, it's just not being shared honestly around what these usernames and passwords. When a leak is happening, they're having huge consequences. And there's just a couple of other examples. So Empower shuts off its app after a credential stuffing attack. So we're also seeing attackers now pretend to be an app. So actually, if you're on your phone and logging in. I'll use Facebook as an example because it's an easy one. I don't believe Facebook have had this problem, but well, Spotify is probably a good one. So if you're on your phone using Spotify to listen to music, attackers have figured out, actually, if I write a little bit of software that pretends to be Spotify, and actually I can then pretend to be you pretending to be Spotify, and then I can start logging into Spotify and listening to your music and things like that. And while that doesn't sound like it's bad news for you because someone's just listening to your music, and it probably isn't a big deal for you, it's a nightmare for Spotify, because if you're, from a brand perspective, if you're logging into your phone and it says the last song that you listened to, you know, I don't know, Billy Joel or something like that, and you don't like Billy Joel, you immediately gives you back up, right? Why is someone in my account? What else are they doing? So we're seeing these attacks all over the news all of the time. And this is, again, the whole point of this today was really just to share some of that insight about what it actually means to be a data subject inside of a data breach. And as I say, we've been doing this for a long time now. We're starting to see the regulators and the authorities ask people to pay attention to this now, because it is becoming a growing problem. So the Financial Conduct Authority put out something called the Cybersecurity Industry Insights paper. And this is not regulatory standard, but what they're trying to do is get people who work inside the financial industry to share thoughts and ideas about how they could improve their security posture. And one of those recommendations was to adopt password testing. Test employees' passwords across exposed credential dumps along with commonly used credentials. And almost at the same time as that, the FBI put out a notice in the US saying, we're currently seeing thousands and thousands of accounts being taken over because usernames and passwords are being leaked from somewhere else and used to gain access to financial systems. So that's really all I wanted to talk about in terms of slides. But I think the message that I wanted to convey, there's probably 3 takeaways from this, and this is something that Paul's company can certainly help you with, is there are technologies out there that will help you not use the same password time and time again. So like, take some advice from Paul. I'm sure he'll be able to help you around that. Two-factor authentication is very important. And again, Paul and 18IT will be able to help you with that. But also like monitoring and being aware of what's leaking is, in our view, quite important. If you can't see it, you can't defend against it. And that goes right back to my days in the government when we were building these log analysis systems. The reason we were doing that was because the thought process was, if we can't see weird, we can't defend against weird. So it's very important that we have eyes on. So I think the 3 takeaways are, like, you know, try and use unique passwords, two-factor authentication wherever you possibly can, and try and monitor for data leaks that could affect you or your business, really. So that's the slides. I'm happy to kind of show a bit of Trillian if people are interested in how we kind of deal with this as a problem. Yeah, I don't know if there's any questions, Paul.
Thank you, John. That's fantastic. I haven't seen anything pop up at the moment, but it's a really good sort of overview on some of the challenges that businesses across the board are up against. Small, medium-sized businesses and micro businesses are all just as much at risk, and I think that's really been highlighted in this. So yeah, is it possible to have a quick look at the Trillian piece there as well?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So the data breaches. Am I still sharing my screen? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Let me. Give me 1 second. So the data breaches, as I say, are the bit that fascinates us, and we are kind of a bit. Oh, there's a question there. Which industries are being targeted the most in the UK? So that's a good question. So. Which industries are being targeted the most? It goes in peaks and troughs. I mean, right now it's open season, so I'll tell you what's happened. It's a really interesting thing. So a few years ago, it was about a year ago, actually, like, crypto exchanges were the #1 target because they were sitting on all this money, and they were new companies, so they were sort of really exciting, and they were worth trying to break into and steal money. So we saw a lot of that. Prior to that, it was things like where people would hold credit cards and things like that. So that was back in the early days. So people were trying to steal credit card numbers. Then PCI came in, so the credit card numbers became much harder to come by. So then for a while, it was it kind of went into defense contractors and things like that. So it does evolve depending on the mood. But over the last 2 years, it's become, I'm not quite sure what's happened, but it's become open season. So now anything is literally up for grabs. And that's for a couple of reasons, I think, really. One is because all of the pieces needed to make money are now in play. So ransomware's like evolved really nicely so that it works really well, and they can literally hold you to ransom. You're not having your data back unless you pay any. Payment almost, payment used to be a problem for criminals. Like, how do I actually receive my money without getting arrested when I go and pick it up, sort of thing. Cryptocurrency solved that problem. And so now what we're seeing is actually, it doesn't matter. Everyone's fair game. If you care about your business and you've got that, and you don't want it to be destroyed, then there's a great opportunity for me to kind of break into your systems and either attack you directly or use you to attack somebody else. And we're seeing that whole supply chain thing become much more of a bigger deal as well. So for example, let's imagine somebody on this call does own a courier company, right? I have no idea if anybody does, but if you own a courier company and one of your customers is a big cosmetics company, maybe I couldn't care less about your courier company, but what I do care about is your customer data. So I'm going to break in there. I'm going to get enough data that enables me to try and convince somebody to open a shipping note or something like that at the cosmetics company, and that'll give me another footprint in. So it's now, I don't think we're seeing any real bias one way or the other now. It's really whatever is softest is going to get targeted, I think is probably the way that I would put that now, unfortunately. How to search
John, just on that point there, actually, you touched on about the supply chain and stuff. So that's actually quite an interesting point, because we've been talking with some clients as well. And some of the areas that they're talking about is they don't necessarily always perceive that they need to put two-factor authentication, for example, on their social media feeds, because they go, it's just me on the weekend doing non-work related stuff. So why would that need to be targeted? Why do I need to put two-factor authentication on something like that?
Yeah, I mean, that's well, ask Donald Trump, right? His Twitter account got taken over because he didn't have two-factor authentication on it. And, you can only imagine what his password was. But in fact, I think I know what his password was. It was like, you're fired or something atrocious like that. I think that was the, I'm not even joking. And, at that point in time, he was the president of the United States. And thank God, the person who took over his account, I mean, it was insane, right? They had hold of a Twitter account with tens or hundreds of millions of followers owned by the president of the United States. And what they tried to do was get people to send him Bitcoin, right, to a Bitcoin address. So they decided that the best use of that account was a Bitcoin scam, which shows how kind of immature the attacker was, but they still managed to kind of take over his account. But you can imagine if he'd have just tweeted, I'm hitting the red button, right? Like that would have, I mean, God only knows what would have happened. So, but your social media account is again, it's really your identity now. And it enables, if you can get that taken over, then it makes all of your friends vulnerable immediately, all your connections vulnerable immediately. Things like email are the worst, actually, because that's where all your password resets go. So if you've got a personal email account and you kind of go, wow, I only use it for junk mail mostly, when you go and click, reset on your HSBC account or whatever, you get a reset link straight to your email. So it's just, I know 2FA is not, it's not the panacea of security, but like, turn it on if you can, for sure. And as everyone will be seeing, I'm now entering my 2FA code. Right. So the next question was how to search if your data has been leaked. So there's two answers to that, actually. So if you're interested in, do you have any comment, Paul, before I go?
No, John, carry on. You're doing well.
Okay, so if you're talking about your personal data, like is john@hotmail.com been leaked, then there's a website called Have I Been Pwned, which is really good for like home use and free use. It's very, very basic, so it's not going to tell you much, but it will tell you if your personal information is out there. If you want to know if your business information has been leaked, then actually Paul can run a search for you. So Paul has tools at his disposal which will enable him to run a high-level summary report. So actually he can turn that around for you and let you know whether or not there's information that he can see or that have been leaked on the dark web. If you were to have a data breach, what steps would you take afterwards? So if I were to have a data breach, well, let's talk about the steps that I would take before I have a data breach. So I would engage with Paul, first of all, to make sure that I'm doing everything that I can to not have a data breach. And what I mean by that, and I'm not trying to be flippant, is I would try and, make sure, or I'd ask Paul's help to make sure that I've got 2FA everywhere I can. I'd ask Paul's help to maybe get me a little password vault so I'm not using the same passwords everywhere. And then I would ask Paul to make sure that my data is in a robust backup, because I think a lot of people aren't really considering, like, if you're using the cloud, that's great, but the cloud isn't backing up your data necessarily. It's just storing it there. And if you get a ransomware attack and all that data gets encrypted, the cloud might not be able to help you, right? You still need a backup strategy in order to be able to recover. So I'd firstly try not to get breached, but again, I'm not being flippant about that. Any one of us could get breached realistically if we're unlucky enough. So I would try and put in good controls to make sure that I was pretty secure. I would make sure that I've got a backup and I've got somebody looking after my systems if I don't know how to do that, so that I'm in a position to recover. I think that's really key. Like, don't assume it won't happen, kind of assume it will happen, and then you'll be safe. And then I think the other things that I would think seriously about is open and honest communications about what's happened with the people that have been affected, because we've seen a couple of different strategies for this. There's been complete denial, like we haven't had a data breach, I don't want to talk about it, and eventually it comes out that someone has had a data breach and it's a really bad look. And then we've seen the opposite end of that, where people have been really open and sort of said, look, we've had a data breach and we're very sorry, we've engaged the company, we think it may have been caused by this situation, and like almost not oversharing, but being really open. I think people really empathize much better that you're just another human being who's unfortunately had an attack. So I think getting your communications right, I would advise you not to deny it. I would advise you to kind of handle it maturely and well, I think is kind of a key. I don't know if any of that helps, but speak to Paul. Paul will be able to kind of hold your hand on a lot of that. There's a couple more questions here. Some of our users on Office 365 will receive emails from what looks like someone within the company. These emails are trying to get the user to open documents. Okay, so there was an interesting question there about internal emails. Emails looking like they're originating from within inside the company, with people trying to get other people to click links. So there's a couple of classic situations that might cause that. So I don't want to cause alarm, but one might be that someone has kind of done what I've talked about today. So they've managed to find a username and a password that's enabled them to get access to that person, someone within the company's email account, and then they're sending emails from their account to other people in the company. Again, if I'm the finance director of a company and then I send someone else an email going, open this immediately, they're probably going to open it. So it's a very popular strategy for people to try and take over one account and then use that to like get other people to infect systems. So that's definitely worth investigating. And again, Paul will be able to help you with that. And the other option is what they try and do is they will what's the word I'm looking for? Spoof a domain name. So instead of having 18IT, for example, .com, send the email, they might register 181t.com, which looks really close. And if you're not paying attention, then somebody might think, if I sent an email from Paul at t.com. It might look like it's Paul's email address, and that might be good enough to trick some people. And they can be very, very subtle with those changes to the point that you can't even tell the difference. So it looks like it's coming from an internal email account, but it actually isn't. They've done something really weird with the email address that actually means that it's not coming internally, it's coming externally, but they are trying to trick you. So again, the ways to deal with that are firstly, user awareness training. It sounds like the fact that you've even spotted it is brilliant, like you're doing well there, but you can start putting in some block rules and stuff like that. And again, I'm sure Paul will be able to help with that. How do we get visibility into the risks or threats in the supply chain? We may protect ourselves, but how do we get our chains to be secure? Wow, Theo's on it. I mean, have you got any thoughts on that, Paul, before I kind of go? Or
it's an interesting point, and it's I don't think there's a magic wand you can wave and you can kind of resolve that almost straight away. I think it's probably engagement with your supply chain, whether it's supplying you or whether you're providing further up the chain as well. But just an awareness and say, look, we're trying to make ourselves a harder nut to crack, is what I call it. Nothing's going to be 100%, but we talk about security in layers. If you add layers of security, it's just helping to make you a harder target. So I'd probably say, just from my point of view, I'm sure John can elaborate from his side of things there as well, but just an engagement with the supply chain to say, right, we're operating this benchmark and we strongly recommend, or we advise you do the same.
I couldn't agree more, Paul. I think the supply chain is really difficult, and it depends on, I'll be honest, it depends on your size as to how bullish you can be with them. Because if you're one of 1 billion customers and you spend £1 a week with them, for example, and then you go to them and say, like, tell me about your ISO 27001 position, for example, they're like, well, whatever. If you're a meaningful supplier to them, you can be much more robust about what you challenge them on and go, look, I really want to know what your security posture is and things like that. And there are tools out there, shameless plug actually. So the company that owns Trillian also owns a tool, which I'm sure Paul and Angus will be able to talk to you about. But there are tools out there that enable you to questionnaire your suppliers. So you can kind of list them and go, right, these are all my suppliers. These 3 are the most important to my business. And I want to know confidently that they are really secure. These other ones, if they get compromised, I'm not really worried because they have very limited impact on me. So there are tools out there that, and you might, I've definitely received them. You might have had questionnaires yourself going, do you have 2FA? Do you have MFA? Do you have antivirus? Do you have cyber insurance? Do you have this, that, and the other? And all those questionnaires are trying to build up, like, are you a robust supplier or are you a vulnerable supplier? But it's a really difficult question, Theo, because who is your supply chain, right? Is LinkedIn part of your supply chain? Depends how you use it potentially. If it's core to your hiring, if you're a recruiter, for example, you could argue that they're part of your supply chain, but they're not going to do anything useful for you. So I'm not an expert on the supply chain. It's a difficult one, but I think we're starting to see buyers challenging suppliers a lot more on their interpretation of their robustness. So I think you're perfectly within your rights. Right, Chris, what's the best way to establish a thorough, practical and robust BCP and DR plan for when these breaches occur, and who's responsible to have this in place, the end user or the MSP? Wow, so this one's probably definitely better for Paul, but the one thing I would say, again, from experience is as much as you might want to, you kind of can't outsource responsibility. Really, you can certainly outsource expertise, and you can certainly outsource authority, but if the responsibility will always be yours. If you're the company owner or the data owner or something like that, then the buck will always stop with you. It doesn't matter how angry you are that you've been let down somewhere else. Your customers will expect the answers from you. But so I think for you, it's your responsibility to want to get it done, and then you can kind of outsource getting it done and and monitor that definitely. But it does take the data owner to want to get it done, because they are going to be the one carrying the can ultimately. The ICO, again, I'm not throwing that around to frighten anyone, but the ICO will not go to your MSP for answers. They'll come to you. So I think, if you're serious about it, then get a trusted pair of hands on it for sure, and then work collaboratively with them. Paul?
Perfect. Thanks for that, John. No, I fully agree with you on that one. The data owner, the DPO, is the person really accountable for that inside each individual business. So it's who owns that data set. They are the ones that are going to be accountable. We can help advise them or shine a spotlight on those areas so they can really understand what they've signed up to, or where their risks are and what their appetite for risk is around. But at the end of the day, as John said, it's always with the data owner and that business. We're there as a capacity to help them understand that and understand how they can mitigate that risk and put the controls in place to manage that, really.
Thank you, Paul. All right, so we're running out of time. I really realise I've taken up a lot of everyone's time already. So again, just back to the original question: how to search if your data has been leaked. Paul, we share technology with Paul and with 18IT, and that is Trillian, which I'm sharing my screen for now. And Paul has some capability within this software to do what's called like a triage search. So if you're worried if your business has got any exposure, then Paul has capability in order to be able to kind of do at a very, very high level some kind of triage for you. And then if you actually want to know on an ongoing basis that whether your data is being leaked, then Paul has this tooling that will enable him to keep track of that for you. And the idea behind Trillian is really it's all of those data breaches that I was talking about at the beginning, those tables that are leaking secret information and being shared with criminal groups. Trillian's like watching all of the time, looking at that data, going like, can I see anything that I've been told to look for effectively? So what Paul's able to do is put in your domain name, i.e. 18it.com, for example. He's able to put that in the system, and then the system is then told, go and look for any email addresses that contain that, and then go and bring them back, and anything else that you can see. So that enables Paul to provide like an ongoing kind of monitoring service for you. And to give you an idea of what Trillian's crunching through, it's currently aware of over 9,000 data breaches that are being shared on criminal markets, that consist of over 10.6 billion credentials. And I mentioned on my very first slide, there's only 7.5 billion people on the planet, and there's 10.6 billion credentials. So there's a really good argument to say that you will be impacted in some way in that data. And what we can do with Trillian is, as I say, if we just give it a domain name, if you want ongoing monitoring for your company, we can just pop in your domain names. Paul will start getting information and alerts regarding data that's being leaked for your company, and then Trillian will start prioritizing that and reporting that out. So here's a company that we're monitoring right now. Their company domain name is shortfineleg.co.uk. So this is a cricketing company. We own this company, so it's not really a customer or anything. But so we own this company, shortfineleg.co.uk. We've told Trillian to go and look for it. And what it's doing is looking through all of those thousands and thousands of data dumps, those billions of records, seeing whether or not our emails are turning up in any of them. And then if it's finding those email addresses, it's reporting them back into Paul. And then Paul's able to really look through the data and see whether or not this is dangerous. So Paul has the ability to kind of basically help you identify where the data is leaking from. So we can see we've got a user here. He leaked data from Dropbox, Mac Forums, and Forbes. So there are 3 websites that are quite popular that have leaked data. But importantly, Trillian won't report back to Paul anything sensitive. So if you were using a religious website or a website that was related to your medical health, or gambling or dating or anything like that. Those are automatically hidden by the software. So Paul will never get to see that information. He'll only get to see the information that's kind of like, you know, business related, basically. Anything that's not business related, Paul doesn't get to see. But the software does know where that data's come from. And what we're able to do is actually like aggregate that information up, and then Paul has the ability to then send that data directly down to you. So if you've asked Paul to look after your company and your company's short fine leg and Graham has turned up in the data, Paul has the ability to transmit the data that's been found down to Graham, and what that will reveal at Graham's end is what those private breaches were. So these are the personal websites that you were using as well. And also these are the passwords that have been found, so that actually Graham can then safely and privately look at his data and then decide whether or not any of it's dangerous, and then potentially ask 18IT for resolution as well. So that's really a very short introduction to the capability, but that's one of the tools that Paul has and 18IT have in their toolkit. But we're nearly out of time, so I'll stop talking.
Perfect. Thanks, John. That's great. Hopefully people on the call today have found that helpful and of use. As John's alluded to, we can put in monitoring to sort of do a bit of an initial fact finding. How bad is this for us? We can see if there's any records that are out there, and then you can make decisions on what you need to do next. And that's all it really is. It's just putting a spotlight in that really difficult, hard to reach place to give you visibility, as we call it, on information that you might not know, so you can make an informed decision on what you need to do next. And we can help you guide that with the likes of John from Trillian, to really scratch down into that silo and understand what's happening there for you inside your business. So I want to say thank you, John, for your time, and the people joining our call. If there's any additional comments or questions that people have got, please do drop them in the Q&A, and then we will reach out to you directly after the session here, and we can answer those questions for you and see what we need to do next. John, back over to you.
Right, yeah, well, thank you. I'm just I was literally just writing you super welcome. Thank you everyone for attending. It's been a pleasure, and hopefully we'll speak to some of you again soon.